The 80s served up Saturday morning cartoons, sugary cereal, and emotional destruction. But what made this decade so uniquely terrifying for kids? A single scene in the Pee Wee Herman movie scarred an entire generation, and a horse sinking in mud became one of cinema's most devastating moments. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 things that traumatized every 80s kid. 25. Pop Rocks and Soda. The 80s were full of wild playground rumors, but none spread faster than the Pop Rocks myth. Kids everywhere were convinced that eating Pop Rocks while chugging soda would make their stomachs explode. Those little rocks would crackle and pop in your mouth thanks to pressurized carbon dioxide, which felt weird enough on its own. Add in some sensationalized media stories and a few made-up celebrity rumors, and suddenly every kid on the playground was treating Pop Rocks like contraband. Some even refused to eat them altogether, while others would dramatically test the theory while friends watched from a safe distance, fully expecting someone to blow up. The best part? It was all completely fake, as your stomach can actually handle the extra fizz without issue. But try telling that to a terrified third grader in 1985. 24. Care Bears' Magic Powers. Care Bears were marketed as the ultimate wholesome entertainment. Colorful bears with belly badges that spread love, friendship, and good vibes. But for certain children, the idea that cartoon bears had magical powers that could affect real life was low-key terrifying. The line between fantasy and reality got blurry fast. These bears could cry magic tears, shoot rainbow beams from their stomachs, and fix problems through sheer emotional force. That sounds cute, until you're a kid wondering if Care Bears are watching you right now, judging your behavior and maybe planning to intervene without permission. Could they punish you? Could they make you feel things you didn't want to feel? And the show never drew a line on what they could or couldn't do, so your imagination filled in the gaps. 23. The Dark Crystal's Skeksis. Jim Henson was supposed to make friendly puppets. The Muppets were cuddly, Sesame Street was educational. Then, he made the Dark Crystal in 1982 and decided to traumatize an entire generation with the Skeksis. These vulture-like creatures looked like something pulled from a nightmare. They had rotting robes, skeletal faces, and voices that sounded like they were gargling gravel. The opening scene showed one of them dying and decomposing on screen. In a kids' movie. Directed by the guy who made Kermit the Frog. The Skeksis drained the life force from innocent creatures to stay alive. They schemed, they screeched, and they moved in this jerky, unsettling way that made puppets feel more threatening than any CGI monster. Parents took their children expecting wholesome fantasy and got body horror instead. The Dark Crystal proved that Jim Henson had a twisted side, and nobody who saw it as a kid ever forgot those creatures. 22. Chuck E. Cheese animatronics come alive. Chuck E. Cheese was marketed as the ultimate kid paradise, with pizza, arcade games, and a live robot band performing for you. Except, those animatronics were not as friendly as advertised, and every child secretly knew it. When the lights were on and the place was packed, the band passed for friendly. Chuck E., Helen Hench, Mr. Munch, and the gang would play their songs, move their creaky joints, and blink their glass eyes at you while you tried to enjoy your pepperoni. But something felt wrong. The movements were too jerky. The voices sounded possessed. Sometimes they'd glitch mid-performance and stare into the void like they were planning something. Kids developed elaborate theories about what happened after closing time. Did the robots step off their stage and roam around? Were they having secret meetings? Between the flickering lights and that eerie hum coming from the stage, the vibe was always slightly unsettling. So, even when the place was full of screaming kids and a birthday cake, being there after dark is a hard pass. 21. Getting trapped in old appliances. The 80s had wild safety warnings, but the "don't get trapped in an old refrigerator" PSAs hit different. Parents and teachers made sure every kid knew that climbing into an abandoned appliance was a one-way ticket, and they weren't subtle about it. Old fridges and freezers had heavy doors with latches that locked from the outside. Once you were in, you were stuck. There's no handle on the inside and no way to push open, only an airtight box running out of oxygen. Kids would play hide and seek, think a junked fridge was the perfect spot, and the PSA made sure you knew how that ended. Every vacant lot with discarded appliances became forbidden territory. Parents would drive by and point them out like warnings, prompting the manufacturers to eventually redesign everything with magnetic seals you could push open from the inside. But the fear never faded, and a whole generation grew up viewing refrigerators as potential traps. Fun bonus fact, that's the reason the DeLorean is the time machine in Back to the Future. It was originally going to be a refrigerator, but Robert Zemeckis didn't want kids climbing into refrigerators to reenact the movie. So, we got the iconic DeLorean instead. 20. Swimming pool drain suction. Every kid who grew up swimming in public pools had the same fear. That drain at the bottom sucking you down and holding you there. And the adults made it worse by constantly warning you about it. The lectures never stopped, and stories ran around about kids getting trapped. Even the lifeguards would tell you the force was strong enough that it took multiple people to pull someone loose. Those drains looked terrifying with their big dark circles at the deepest parts and metal grates covering them. Watching the water swirl down only made it worse. Some kids avoided the deep end completely. Others would frantically paddle away anytime they drifted too close, treating that drain like a black hole ready to swallow them. 19. Killer bees migrating north. Pool drains weren't the only lurking danger. There were also killer bees, the Africanized honeybees that were supposedly swarming north from South America, ready to chase people for miles until they dropped from 1,000 stings. News programs loved this story. Documentaries made it sound like an unstoppable insect army was marching toward the United States. Kids learned these bees were more aggressive, that they'd swarm in massive numbers, that once they started chasing you, they wouldn't give up. Running wouldn't help. Hiding wouldn't help. You were doomed. Schools held assemblies about this. Don't wear bright colors, they said. If they chase you, run in a zigzag pattern and cover your face. Some families considered moving to Canada. The bees did eventually make it to the southern US, but the apocalyptic mass swarm scenario never materialized, confirming that the media might have exaggerated. 18. Large Marge scene in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Large Marge is the reason kids refuse to get into cars with strangers at night. This scene from Pee-wee's Big Adventure came out of nowhere and traumatized children who thought they were watching a goofy comedy about a guy looking for his stolen bike. In it, Pee-wee can be seen hitching a ride with a friendly trucker named Large Marge, who tells him a ghost story about a fatal accident she witnessed. Everything's fine until her face suddenly warps into a skeletal, bug-eyed nightmare with a grin that haunts you forever. The screeching sound effect didn't help either. Nobody saw it coming. Children weren't ready, parents weren't ready, and theater ushers dealt with a lot of crying that summer. The image burned itself into young brains, and dark roads have felt scarier than ever since. Thanks, Tim Burton. 17. Gremlins. The 1984 movie Gremlins should have come with a warning label saying, "We'll ruin your relationship with stuffed animals forever." While kids walked into theaters expecting a cute story about a fuzzy pet, what they actually got was a masterclass in why you should never trust anything adorable. The rules seem simple. Don't expose your mogwai to bright light, keep it away from water, and don't feed it after midnight. Break those rules, and your sweet gizmo transforms into a nightmarish creature that wants to destroy everything you love. For kids who begged for a plush mogwai afterward, bedtime got complicated fast. The Gremlins themselves were pure chaos, often violent, mischievous, and way smarter than any monster should be. They multiplied, went after people, and seemed to enjoy wrecking stuff. Suddenly, that cute toy on your shelf felt like it might be plotting something. 16. Scary stories to tell in the dark illustrations. Alvin Schwartz wrote creepy stories for his Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books, but the real nightmare came courtesy of Stephen Gammell's illustrations. Those drawings didn't enhance the stories, they burrowed into your brain and set up permanent residence there. Gammell's artwork was something else entirely. black and white sketches that looked pulled from someone's fever dream. Skeletal faces with hollow eyes, twisted bodies that defied anatomy, and shadowy figures that felt like they were moving on paper. The big toe and the hook became playground legends, with kids daring each other to stare at the pictures without looking away. Schools and libraries started banning these books once parents realized their children were having legitimate nightmares. However, that only made them more desirable. Soon, kids started smuggling them around like contraband, reading them under blankets with flashlights at sleepovers, then spending the rest of the night wide awake. 15. Thundercats' Mumm-Ra transformation. Saturday morning cartoons were supposed to be a safe space, until Thundercats decides to throw Mumm-Ra into the mix and says, "What if we traumatize children instead?" This mummified villain had a transformation sequence that belonged in a horror film, not sandwiched between cereal commercials. He'd start chanting, "Ancient spirits of evil, transform this decayed form into Mumm-Ra, the ever-living!" Then his bandaged skeletal body would morph into this massive sorcerer with glowing red eyes while everything got dark. Children were blindsided. The skeletal imagery was intense, but add the supernatural chanting, the creepy lighting, and that unsettling music, and you had a recipe for nightmares. Some would hide behind the couch when his transformation music started, while others changed the channel and pretended they needed a bathroom break. 14. Return to Oz, Wheelers, and the Hall of Heads. The Wizard of Oz was a cheerful classic with singing munchkins and a magical yellow brick road. However, Return to Oz looked at that legacy and decided to burn it to the ground with pure nightmare fuel. First came the Wheelers, horrifying creatures with wheels for hands and feet. They'd chase Dorothy through abandoned ruins while making awful mechanical screeching sounds. Their faces were hidden behind creepy masks that looked like they belonged in a slasher film. Children walked in expecting Dorothy's next cheerful adventure and got hunted by demon roller skaters. Then came the Hall of Heads, where Princess Mombi casually removed her own head and swapped it for a different one she kept stored in glass cabinets. Rows of disembodied heads sitting on shelves all talking. Body horror served elementary schoolers who weren't ready for it. Some parents even walked out mid-movie. 13. Being picked last in Dodgeball. After all this supernatural horror, let's talk about something that actually happened in real life and cut deep, like getting picked last for Dodgeball. Peak public humiliation, 80s edition. The setup was brutal. 2 team captains stood in front of class and picked players one by one while everyone else waited. Getting chosen early meant you were athletic and popular. Getting chosen in the middle meant you were passable and likable. Getting chosen last, or worse, being assigned to whatever team was stuck with you, was social destruction. You'd stand there, watching everyone else get picked, feeling smaller with each name called that wasn't yours. The gym teacher would let it happen, acting like this wasn't creating core memories that would fuel therapy sessions decades later. Dodgeball was already a nightmare where athletic kids got to legally throw things at your face, but being publicly ranked as the least valuable player first on top of that, it's plain cruelty disguised as PE. 12. The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs. This urban legend single-handedly ruined babysitting as a career choice. The Babysitter and the Man Upstairs spread through sleepovers like wildfire, and every kid who heard it suddenly understood why staying home alone was a terrible idea. It was said that a teenage babysitter was watching kids in a quiet suburban house. Everything's fine, until the phone rings, and some creepy voice asks, "Have you checked the children?" So she hangs up, weirded out. However, the phone rings again. Same question, more menacing. After multiple calls, she contacts the police to trace where they're coming from. That's when they hit her with the worst news. The calls are coming from inside the house, and the intruder's been upstairs this whole time. Sleepovers were never the same again. Phone calls at night became instant red flags. Babysitting went from easy money to a potential nightmare, and plenty of teens decided flipping burgers sounded way safer than spending evenings alone in other people's houses. 11. Creepy clown sightings. Clowns were supposed to make you laugh. Big red nose, floppy shoes, balloon animals. Standard birthday party fare. Except somewhere along the way, clowns stopped being funny and started being terrifying. Nobody could figure out when that shift happened. News stations just started reporting stories about men dressed as clowns lurking near playgrounds or chasing kids through neighborhoods. Were these stories always accurate? Probably not. Did it matter? The damage was done, and every clown immediately became a potential threat. After that, movies kept piling on with frightening clowns, which made everything worse. Kids who used to giggle at circus performers were now crossing the street to avoid them. The makeup, the forced smile, the unpredictable energy, it all added up to something that felt sinister rather than silly. Some of us never looked at a circus the same way again. 10. E.T. Atari 2600 game. E.T. the Extraterrestrial for Atari is one of the most infamous disasters in gaming history. This 1982 game was supposed to let you relive the magic of the movie, but instead it made you want to throw your console out the window. Atari rushed this thing into production in 5 weeks because they wanted it out in time for Christmas. The result was a glitchy nightmare where you'd wander around confusing screens, fall into invisible pits constantly, and have no idea what you were supposed to do. You'd think you'd made progress, then fall into another pit, climb out, take 2 steps, fall again. Repeat until you rage quit. Kids who begged their parents for this felt scammed. The game was so bad that Atari buried millions of unsold cartridges in a New Mexico landfill. Yeah, really. Truckloads of this disaster buried like radioactive waste. 9. Hidden needles in Halloween candy. Halloween candy came with a very specific terror that had nothing to do with costumes. Parents were convinced that strangers were hiding razors, needles, and poison in trick-or-treat candy, and they made sure every kid knew. News reports treated it like an epidemic. Schools sent home warnings. The fear was everywhere. The ritual was always the same. Come home with your pillowcase full of candy, dump it on the living room floor, and watch your parents inspect every single piece like they were defusing bombs. Anything unwrapped? Trash. Homemade treats from the neighbors? Also trash. Apples? Definitely trash. Apparently people were putting razor blades in those too. Some towns even offered free x-rays at hospitals so parents could scan candy for hidden metal objects. Though it was later confirmed that cases of stranger tampering were almost non-existent, the legend still ended up ruining Halloween for years. 8. Stranger danger. Speaking of candy-related paranoia, if you grew up back then, you must have heard the same warning thousands of times. Do not get into cars with strangers, and do not accept candy from creepy adults in white vans. Stranger danger was drilled into kids' heads so hard, it became a personality trait. The scenario was always identical. Some sketchy person pulls up in an unmarked van, rolls down the window, and dangles candy like bait. Teachers showed PSAs, parents lectured during car rides, playgrounds turned into intelligence-sharing networks where kids would whisper about suspicious vans. Was it overblown? Probably. Did it work? Absolutely. An entire generation developed a stranger danger fear response to white vans and free candy. Even now, adults get a little twitchy around unmarked vehicles. It's always safety first, trust nobody, and definitely don't get in that van. And now, with things like Uber and Lyft, we get into cars with strangers all the time, so. 7. Lawn darts. Lawn darts seemed like a great idea to someone. Take heavy weighted spikes with sharp metal tips, tell the people to throw them high in the air, and see who can land them the closest to a plastic ring on the ground. What could go wrong? These things were legitimately dangerous. The darts weighed about a pound each and had metal tips designed to stick into the ground. Except, they didn't always land in the ground. Sometimes they landed in kids' heads, and thousands of children ended up in ERs throughout the decade, with serious injuries. The scariest part? Adults would set up target rings, hand kids these projectile spears, and let them go at it. Sometimes multiple kids are playing at once, all launching heavy pointed objects into the air with zero regard for trajectory. It took until 1988 for lawn darts to get banned. Millions of us played with glorified missiles, and somehow most survived. 6. Teddy Ruxpin. Teddy Ruxpin hit store shelves in 1985 as the must-have Christmas gift. A friendly animatronic bear that would tell bedtime stories through cassette tapes. Parents were thrilled. Their children? Way less enthusiastic. A bear with blinking eyes, a moving mouth, and that weird mechanical whirring wasn't exactly the cuddly companion advertisers promised. This thing existed in uncanny valley territory. Too alive to be a toy, too robotic to be comforting. The mouth would open and close in perfect sync with the tape, which should have been impressive, but instead felt deeply wrong. Those eyes seemed to track your movements. Jerky head tilts? Straight out of a possession movie. Parents believed they were investing in cutting-edge educational technology, but what they actually did was place a battery-operated nightmare generator in their children's bedroom and then act confused when bedtime became a battle. Teddy was marketed as the bear who'd read you stories until you drifted off. In reality, he's the reason kids insisted on leaving the lights on. 5. Missing kids on milk cartons. Sitting down for breakfast, pouring your Frosted Flakes, and locking eyes with a missing kid's face printed on your milk carton. That was a normal Tuesday morning in the mid-'80s. Someone thought slapping photos of disappeared children onto dairy products was a solid plan, and suddenly, breakfast became an existential crisis. The campaign started in 1984 with good intentions. The goal was to help locate missing kids by putting their faces everywhere. But for children eating cereal, the message was terrifying. Kids your age vanish all the time, and their picture ends up on a milk jug like a tragic trading card. Some kids would obsessively check every carton, memorizing faces and wondering what happened. Others refused to look because processing that level of fear was too much before 8 a.m. Milk cartons became a morbid daily reminder that the world was dangerous and children weren't safe. 4. Poltergeist. Poltergeist turned the family television into a portal for malevolent spirits. The movie's most iconic moment featured little Carol Ann sitting in front of a static-filled TV screen, placing her tiny hands on the glass and delivering the line that haunted a generation. "They're here." Suddenly, that harmless box in the living room wasn't so harmless. TVs were supposed to show cartoons and sitcoms, not summon ghosts from other dimensions. Kids who never thought twice about late-night static suddenly couldn't look at it the same way. Plenty of children refused to be alone with the TV after dark. The movie didn't stop there. It threw in a frightening clown doll, a tree that tried to eat a kid, and skeletons popping out of a swimming pool. But that TV scene stuck because it weaponized something familiar and safe. Parents tried to reassure them it was fiction, though nobody was convinced. 3. Quicksand Will Get You. Growing up meant living with the certainty that quicksand was going to get you. Not might, would. Movies, cartoons, and adventure shows treated quicksand like it was lurking everywhere. Forests, deserts, beaches, possibly your own backyard. The portrayal was always the same. Someone takes one wrong step, immediately sinks to their neck, panics, and disappears beneath the surface, unless a hero shows up at the last moment with a rope. It looked terrifying, inevitable, and like something that happened constantly. Playgrounds became quicksand detection zones. Any patch of muddy ground was suspicious. Half of us had a mental escape plan ready just in case, when in fact, quicksand is less common and way less dangerous than the media wanted us to believe. But everyone spent years looking down, expecting to be swallowed whole. 2. Artax in the Swamp of Sadness. Quicksand was terrifying in theory, but the never-ending story delivered actual, soul-crushing trauma that people are still processing. Artax's fate in the Swamp of Sadness was not just sad, it was devastating in a way that few movies dared to be. Atreyu and his horse are crossing the swamp when Artax starts sinking, slowly. That damn quicksand again. The swamp feeds on sadness, and Artax is giving up on life right in front of his best friend. Atreyu screams, begs, and cries, desperately trying to pull his horse out. But Artax keeps sinking deeper into the mud until he disappears completely. Theaters filled with sobbing children after this scene. Parents were blindsided because nobody warned them that a fantasy movie would show a horse sinking into despair. The scene dragged on, and you had to watch every agonizing second. This was not a heroic moment. This was hopelessness, visualized in a way that hit harder than almost anything else that decade. 1. Littlefoot's mom. And finally, we've reached number 1, and if you grew up during this decade, you probably saw this coming. Disney movies had taught us that bad things might happen in cartoons, but everything usually worked out. Then, The Land Before Time showed up and said, let's emotionally destroy children instead. Other movies let parents disappear off screen or recover at the last second. Not this one. Littlefoot's mother fought off Sharptooth to protect her son, but she did not survive. The bond between Littlefoot and his mother was beautifully established early on, which made the loss hit even harder. She had time for a heartbreaking goodbye, and then Littlefoot was left completely alone in a dangerous prehistoric world. The filmmakers weren't going for subtle storytelling about mortality. They delivered full-on emotional trauma through tender animation and a soundtrack designed to make you sob. Kids cried in theaters. They cried at home during VHS rewatches. The movie taught everyone watching about loss and the fact that even animated dinosaur moms aren't safe from tragedy. Well, that was a lot. Sinking horses, possessed teddy bears, clowns lurking in neighborhoods, and a dinosaur movie that should have come with a therapy voucher. The 80s really looked at childhood and said, let's spice this up with some lifelong trauma. Honestly, it's impressive that any of us function as adults. What was the most traumatic thing for you from the 80s? Or, if you weren't alive then, from your childhood? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to keep the nostalgia going, check out 25 things you probably didn't know about the 80s. Click right here. And as always, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and maybe go hug a stuffed animal that doesn't have batteries. And I'll catch you next time.